So my April reading, these are the physical books I have, but I actually read 12 books this month. Just a lot of them were audiobooks or ebooks. Like, I want to say Kindle books because I have a Kindle, but that's not like entirely accurate because what's the word for that? Anyway, or I just don't physically have them in my possession anymore. But starting off, first thing I read, this was still on my cruise, was The Drowning Kind by Jennifer McMahon. I think her books are like technically classified as horror. I've been experimenting with horror a little bit, and there's kind of like two kinds. The like unsettling, creepy, just makes you feel weird and uncomfortable horror. And then there's more like the PG-13 horror movie, you know? Like when I think of from when I was younger, like The Ring or The Grudge, something more like that, where it's like a ghost mystery type story. And that's more how I would put this book. And this is the type I like. I don't like so much the like really uncomfortable, weird horror, but I do like this kind of ghosty mystery. Although I would say as compared to like Simone St. James, which are very much ghost mysteries, this is more on the ghost than the mystery. It was an enjoyable read for me. I will say I was like really into it. I kind of started to guess what was going to happen at the end just because of the page count that was left as I was getting there. And that's my main complaint with this book, is that I feel like it set up a lot of interesting stuff, and then for the ending, it just kind of like took the easy way out. And like, I don't think it was bad. I think it fit with the tone of the book, and it's a good story. There were issues I wanted to see resolved, and the resolution was all just like off page. So it was a solid like 3-4 stars though. And I will say I really did enjoy the reading experience. And it's about this woman. There's been this house in her family. It's her grandmother's house. And she finds out that her sister has died there. She drowned in this like spooky pool in the backyard. And we learn about the history of the pool, the sisters' relationships, the whole family dynamics. A lot of good stuff. So solid read, but I feel like she kind of like cheaped out on the ending. And then I read this Megan Miranda. It's called All the Missing Girls. This is my second Megan Miranda. I actually found this book on the cruise ship I was on. They had like a little, kind of like a little free library where you could exchange a book you read and take a different book. I actually left my copy of Reckless Girls in the library and I took this instead. So we get like an introduction of this girl going back to her hometown. When she was a teenager, her best friend disappeared, and while she's back in town, another girl goes missing. So, you know, it says all the missing girls. There's only 2, but still, whatever. And we get that whole setup, and then we jump ahead 2 weeks, and then every chapter after that, it's going back in time a day. So we actually find out the story and the mystery and everything that happened backwards. And I will say, it's skillfully done, and it's set up such that even though you're already at the end point, you're getting reveals every time you go backwards, and like the big climax of the book does happen where you would expect it to. It's impressive how she does it, but I also just like didn't find it very pleasant to read. I think I actually would have preferred to just read the story linearly. I actually considered flipping back in the book and then reading the story backwards but technically forwards. Because it was just driving me nuts. I was having a hard time keeping track of stuff because of it. There's some surprising twists. It's a good mystery, but it just felt gimmicky. But I do think it is kind of also worth the read just for the gimmick. So, I mean, make of that as you will. And then I read The Quarry Girls, which was an ARC from NetGalley. So this book has not yet been released. I forget when it comes out. This one takes place in the 1970s. Basically, your standard 1970s serial killer. It's kind of on the loose. It's told from the perspective of, I think she's a 15-year-old girl. And this one, I don't know about this one either. This is one I kind of had to like push myself to get through. Like I wasn't that excited about reading it. The big reveal, or the reveal is supposed to be the most surprising. I figured out pretty early, although there were other aspects that I didn't guess. So it wasn't like it was a total waste of time. Like the main theme running through this book is very much that men suck, and it is difficult to be a woman and kind of the cards are stacked against you. And while I do very much agree with the whole men suck, men are terrible, it's done like so heavy-handedly. Like I feel like you're just constantly getting smacked over the head with this, like she'll go on these little tangents about that, about the difficulty of growing up as a woman or girl, how the men are against you, and you know, she'll like go off a little side tangent about how like not all of the men, but most of them are absolute fucking shit. And I agree with the whole sentiment, but it's just like I'm trying to read a mystery thriller here. And a lot of it is done by this narrator that's, you know, a 15-year-old girl. And it's like, does she really have that perspective? But ultimately the story is pretty good. Although it does also become kind of a how many bad things could happen to this specific girl. It was fine. Same thing with Invisible Girl by Lisa Jewell, which was then the next thing I read. I can't decide if I like Lisa Jewell. I think this is the third book by her I've read. Fourth, Family Upstairs, then She Was Gone, The Night She Disappeared, and then The Invisible. So yeah, I've read 4 Lisa Jewells now. But like I can't say that I enjoy it a lot, but I also can't say that I don't enjoy it because I keep going back to like I finish all these books and I'm like, yeah, that was fine. About a girl that goes missing, and kind of the main suspect ends up being this man who's a little bit off. And so he becomes the main suspect. You get a lot into like incel culture. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I feel like Lisa Jewell books are usually not that surprising in how they turn out. Like there's usually a pretty narrow cast of characters. Even if you can't quite figure out how they did it or how everything's going to come together, it's usually pretty kind of clear who did it. Or if nothing else, you can like narrow it down to like 1 of 2 people. Her writing's good though, I will say. Like her word choice and everything, it's fine. Like if you want a good mystery thriller, she's not a bad choice, but I feel like she never like does anything that surprising or exciting. I think my favorite by her, I can't even say. I think the one I read the quickest and was like the most engrossed in was And Then She Was Gone. But I kind of like the story of like The Night She Disappeared better. And then The Family Upstairs, even though it was kind of like weirder, I respect it more because it wasn't so obvious and I really didn't have much of a clue what was going on with that one. I feel like my Lisa Jewell opinions are all over the place, but this is fine. This was fine. Something I did really enjoy this month though was I read Meant to Be by Emily Giffin. Emily Giffin being one of my all-time favorite authors, someone I always buy her books and immediately read. I actually won an early edition of this book from Goodreads. I'm so excited. First time I've ever won a Goodreads giveaway. I was starting to think it was a myth. I was starting to think that people didn't actually win them. But not only did I win one, I won an early edition of a book by pretty much my favorite author. And I ended up loving the book. Emily Giffin, I was super into like basically all of her books with the pastel covers. And then her more recent ones over the past like 5 to 10 years have been a little more, like even when they're good, I'm kind of like, but why did you do that with the plot? Why was that choice made? But I always like her writing. And this book is kind of just a straight up romance. She doesn't do anything like weird or out of left field. It goes pretty much the way you're expecting, but her writing's so good. It like carries this kind of otherwise predictable story. And the kind of interesting angle of this story is it's like a fictionalized retelling of the story of JFK Jr. and his wife Carolyn in the 90s. So it takes place primarily in the 90s. The story of this young man who had a very famous father and is from this wealthy, famous, influential family. His father died when he was a small child. He has all these expectations of him that he's supposed to be, you know, the next great thing like his father was. And he meets this woman who's works in fashion. They fall in love. They have all these problems because she's not quite what his family wanted him to marry, and she's not used to the level of celebrity that comes with being with him. It's just a really good story, and I really like her writing, and I love it. I gave it 5 stars. I wish I had the physical copy to show off that I won, but I mailed it to my sister so she could read it. She gave it 5 stars. It's supposed to be going to my cousin Jordan next, so Jordan, if you're watching this, that's what Rebecca's supposed to do. But yeah, I really love this one. And I think if you like Emily Giffin's writing and you've read some of her books and you've been like, why does she do some of these questionable or unlikable characters? This is straightforward romance. If you like that, you will like this. And then something else I did like is Planet Barbarians. I bought this kind of silly as a whim. It's surprisingly enjoyable. It doesn't have great writing. It doesn't take itself too seriously. And it just works. This is about a woman named Georgie. She is abducted by aliens. She and a bunch of other women that the aliens are planning to take and sell for whatever probably nefarious reasons, when the aliens are unexpectedly forced to dump Georgie and the other women on this random planet, leave them there, and then they're planning to come back for them later. And on this planet, Georgie encounters a Vectel, who is a, wait, how is he described? Big blue horned alien. He's like 7 feet tall. I actually love these covers. I've seen like pictures of the original covers for these books and they're absolutely ridiculous and cheesy, which these are too, but I just think they're cute. And like you can see a little Vectel right there. Yeah, the writing's not the greatest in these, but it's certainly not the worst. I remember when I read From Blood and Ash, I complained about all the ellipses, and this has a lot of those. I think it's just like a less polished writing strategy. I would read this entire like 22 book series before I would ever consider reading From Blood and Ash again. So there's actually some skillful plotting that she manages to use to explain things like, you know, initially they can't speak the same language, and she uses kind of a nice little trick to both get Georgie and Vectel speaking the same language and also do kind of like an info dump, explaining more about the aliens and just like things that Georgie really needs to know. She finds a clever way to do that, and she paces things well. You're not really reading this for the plot so much as you are like, you know, the porn. But the pacing of it's good, and the story's actually kind of interesting. I will say though, like when I was reading it, it felt like it ended really abruptly to me because I did not realize that this special edition version, it has the actual book. Like all of this is the book, so it's only like 200 pages. And then this is all like extra. So there's like an extra short story, and then there's an extra like novella, which is called Ice Planet Honeymoon. But Ice Planet Honeymoon, even though it's Georgie and Vectel, it actually takes place after the next book. So there's like a little warning saying there's a spoiler. So like I haven't actually read the Ice Planet Honeymoon portion yet because I did in fact buy the next book. So I'm like, I guess I might as well wait. But yeah, I see why people got into this. It's different. It's like campy, cheesy, doesn't take itself too seriously. I will say it does start off with kind of like a dark beginning with like some kind of rape, although I guess the rape is more graphic in the Kindle version, and the author toned it down for this because I guess people didn't like it because it really doesn't fit with like the tone of the rest of the book. So if you're reading it and you're like, this is dark, I was promised fluff, it gets fluffier. And I read that like none of the other books have anything like that. So it's like, it starts off with one tone and then kind of transitions to another. And that tone is what goes through the rest of the series. And then I read The Paris Apartment by Lucy Foley. I feel like if you like the other Lucy Foleys, you'll like this one. But yeah, this is about a woman. She's going to Paris to try and find her brother, and she gets to his apartment and she's disappeared. He has disappeared. So she's like talking to all the people in the apartment building, and we jump around all the perspectives, like other people in the apartment building. There's a lot of characters. There's a part in the middle of the book where things are kind of dragging, but everything comes together and gets pretty exciting towards the end. So I enjoyed it. I thought it was fun enough. I have also, this was one of my book of the months from March. It's called Tell Me Everything. This is a story about a woman who was a private investigator and was working on a case back in, I think it's 2003, 2004, 2005. It's at Colorado State University. Either that or University of Colorado. She doesn't actually say in the book. Like I had to look it up because she kind of, even though it's obvious and it's a true story, she kind of doesn't mention the university's name, which is fine or whatever, but that's why I don't remember, even though I read a whole book about it. And she's investigating this sexual assault case at the university. And basically what she's investigating is the football team. And it kind of there's one specific incident that kind of gets the whole case going. But when they do start investigating further, they figure out that it's really this like whole culture where in order to recruit players, the football team would like have them come to the college, and they'd have all these like women that were supposed to be giving them attention. They'd go to strip clubs or otherwise try to provide women for the football team recruits. Basically, there's this whole disgusting fucking culture of these football players being treated like they were entitled to any woman on campus, and it led to all these different sexual assault charges or cases. She's investigating them, and it goes to trial and everything. And it's really interesting. It's a good book. It's kind of more of a memoir. It's like more about her and her personal issues and her like life, which isn't like necessarily a bad thing, but it's like not what I went into the book necessarily for. I wanted like the private investigator story, which is kind of how the book's advertised, more than like a personal memoir. It's good, but there'll be like long tangents about how she's doing and her family and her own personal experience with being molested as a child. And like, not that any of that's bad or like shouldn't be in the book or isn't well written. It just like wasn't specifically what I was wanting out of this book. I really wanted more like the mystery, the whodunit aspect of it. But it was still good. It's like a solid 3 stars still. I also read the book Breathless by Amy McCullough, I think it's pronounced. This was another advanced copy I read on NetGalley. I really liked this one. This is about a woman who's hiking a mountain. It's not Everest. It's like the 14th highest mountain in the world. But like Everest, it is above 8,000 meters, which is when you get into like that death zone where there's not enough oxygen. I just like stories about that hiking in general. Like I really liked Into Thin Air. I liked the Everest movie. Every year or so, I'll end up on like a deep dive of all the mountain climbing disasters on Everest, like all the bodies that are still there. So this was right up my alley. It's a woman that's trying to climb a mountain like this. And so you're getting the full like climbing experience, but then there's also like a mystery thriller, more thriller than mystery. Like for most of the book, you kind of like know there's a mystery going on, but it's kind of really in the background to all the climbing stuff. And then kind of the end, there's just this really long, exciting, thrilling chase on the mountain. And it's awesome. I will say, if you're not into the climbing stuff as much as I am, it might drag a little bit more in the beginning until you get to that more thrilling part. But I really like this one. Solid 4 stars. Would recommend if you're like me and you like the whole mountain climbing experience, even though you would absolutely never in a million years try and like climb a mountain like this. And another advanced copy I read was called The Woman in the Library. And this one was very much like a story in a story in a story. The like main, I guess, plot is this woman. She's named Hannah. She's a successful writer. She is working on a new book and corresponding with this man, and she sends him a chapter, and then every chapter he sends her a letter back, kind of like giving her critiques and opinions. And the story that she's writing is about this group of people that meet when they're all in the library together, and there's like this blood-curdling scream and the library shuts down, and then they find out a woman was murdered there. And they become friends, and they kind of like start to Scooby-Doo, try and figure out what happened. And then also within that book, like the main character of that story is also an author who's writing her own book. So there's like a lot of layers to this story. It was okay. I'm such a good book reviewer. I do this so much, and I just end up being like, it was fine. But specifically my problem with this one is the story of the little group of friends that meet in the library. It's like not really believable how quickly they all like cling on to each other. It seemed like not one of these 4 people had a single other friend. And then you know from the beginning that there's like a very narrow list of suspects for this murder. Towards the end especially, you like get whiplash. Like it keeps going back and forth between who it definitely is. But then the other story that's going on between the author writing that story and the man she's like writing the letters to, the resolution of that story takes place like entirely off page, and we only ever get like these really small hints that all this exciting stuff might have happened, but not enough to feel satisfied. And I see what the author was trying to do with this story, but I think she was just a little too scant with the details there, and it just ultimately wasn't very satisfying. So it was okay. I wouldn't recommend it. But let me tell you about this book. This was my most unexpected read. I'd seen this book before, didn't really know much about it. It's not an author I've read before. I just randomly stumbled across this at Goodwill, and then I started reading it, and it started off honestly kind of slow. Like the first 5 to 10 pages, I was like, ooh, I'm not gonna like this, because she uses a lot of old-fashioned words, and I kept having to like look stuff up because I was like, I have no idea what's going on. But once it got going, fast-paced, intense, stressful to read, I read it all in like one day. This is about the 1918 flu epidemic. The whole book takes place in like 3 days, and it's from the perspective of a nurse that is working in like a maternity ward in the hospital, specifically treating women who are both pregnant and have the Spanish flu. And everything's understaffed, and she's very much on her own. There's a lot of graphic medical stuff. It's very sad, but just the way she struggles through it was like stressful for me to read. It was really good. I was super interested and super invested in it. Like I said, the whole book takes place in 3 days. Very quick, very intense, very just... I was not expecting to love this. Even, like I said, when I started reading the first couple pages, I was like, I'm not into this. I'm just gonna kind of plow through it. But I fucking loved it. 5 stars. And I will say this author, Emma Donoghue, wrote the book Room, which I've never read, but obviously know about. She's written like a ton of other books I did not realize. because I've never heard of her about anything other than Room. But look, she's written multiple other books, none of which I guess have gotten much attention, including this one. But I really loved this. And then finally, another book I did not know I needed in my life, A Solitude of Wolverines. The title maybe could have used some workshopping. The title comes from the fact that I guess there is no word for a group of wolverines, you know, like a pack of wolves or a murder of crows, that type of thing. So the main character decides to go with a solitude of wolverines because wolverines are such solitary creatures, they don't even have their own name. Whatever, fine. This is about a woman. She's a biologist. She is up in this station in Montana, kind of like up in the mountains at this like abandoned hotel or ski resort, conducting this study and watching these wolverines. She starts getting like threatening notes. Someone tries to run her off the road. All this stuff starts happening and she suspects it's because people don't want her there studying the wolverines because it's this big like nature preserve and people don't want it to be a nature preserve because they want to like hunt there and shit. I'm not describing it well. And again, this book had some issues with pacing. It takes us a little while to get Alex, the main character, kind of like set up in her new place, and then it takes a little bit to kind of get going with the plot, but the end is like straight up pure thriller. Loved it. Resolution was good. And this is a series. So we do a lot of like setting up characters where you're like, this character might not have paid off in this book, but I feel like they're gonna in the next one. I don't really have like a series like this I follow. So I was really happy to find this. If you're looking for something like that, like you like a little thriller, you like a little nature, hiking, because there's quite a bit of hiking in this, animals, this was a good one. And I can tell that this author loves animals like I do, because there ends up being a lot of animals in this book, wild and not so wild, not to give anything away. She doesn't fucking kill them off. There's a couple dead animals, but all the dead animals are like animals that we've never met. Like they were already dead when we found them. And like every animal that is actually met gets out of this book alive, which I appreciate. And I appreciate this fucking biologist too, because there's a point where she's like fighting for her life and she was like, but there's some animals I really need to help, actually. I'm going to risk my life to go make sure these animals are okay. And I'm like, yes, you go, girl. There is no like cheap animal death in this book that is very animal heavy in the plot. You like hiking, you like a little thriller, you're an animal lover, and you're interested in like animal conservation studies and everything. This is really good. And if you like it, there's a series. So I would recommend this one. And that's it. That is a lot of books. I'm going to have to work on editing this so it's not too long. But I'll see you guys next time.